The Metaphysical Manual, Basic Level, a work created by Oscar Gonzalez for Biblio Studio. Chapter 1. Awakening to the Invisible, the Need for Metaphysics. The history of humanity is marked by two fundamental quests: to understand the world around us and to understand ourselves. For centuries, the natural sciences have dealt with the former, unveiling the secrets of matter, the stars, and biological life. But there exists another dimension, less tangible, that draws us with equal force, the realm of the invisible, the immaterial, that which escapes the physical senses and yet determines much of what we experience in daily life. This sphere of knowledge has been called metaphysics. Speaking of metaphysics at a basic level does not mean speaking of something trivial. On the contrary, it means taking the first steps toward a knowledge that expands without limits. Like someone opening the door to an unknown mansion, the beginner is confronted with wonder, doubts, and sometimes skepticism. But what matters is not to accept or reject immediately, but to remain willing to explore. Why do we need metaphysics today? The contemporary world offers comforts and advances unimaginable to past generations. Yet, alongside them, we also see an increase in anxiety disorders, a sense of existential emptiness, and confusion about the meaning of life. The paradox is evident. The more material progress we achieve, the more we feel detached from what is essential. And here is where metaphysics comes into play, as a bridge to inner harmony and as a compass to navigate existence. At its core, metaphysics seeks to answer universal questions. Who am I beyond my name and personal history? What laws govern the relationship between my thoughts and what I experience? How can I consciously transform my reality? These questions are not the exclusive domain of mystics or philosophers. Every human being, sooner or later, asks them. The difference is that some seek the answers in inherited dogmas, while others dare to look beyond. One of the most basic principles of metaphysics is that thought precedes manifestation. In other words, what we hold in our mind, with enough intensity, emotion, and repetition, ends up shaping what surrounds us. This is not naive idealism, but an operative principle confirmed daily. A curious example is found in the records of Émile Coué, a French pharmacist and psychologist of the early 20th century. He noticed that patients who received their medicines, along with an encouraging word, had better results than those to whom they were given without any comment. This led him to formulate his famous phrase, "Every day, in every way, I'm getting better and better." It may sound like a simple mantra, but his observation held a metaphysical truth. The mind directs, and the body and circumstances obey. The laboratory of metaphysics, then, is not an ivory tower or an astronomical observatory. It is the daily life of each person. Every thought, every word, and every emotion are ongoing experiments, and what we reap is the result of those invisible sowings. For the beginner, speaking of metaphysics may seem to involve overly abstract matters: the essence of being, the nature of the soul, the correspondence between planes. However, the best way to approach it is through the concrete. Who has not experienced, for example, that when a day begins with a negative attitude, everything seems to go wrong? Or that when one fully trusts in something, circumstances seem to conspire to make it happen? An old Japanese tale tells of a farmer who used to begin each morning by giving thanks to his tools before touching them. He greeted the hoe, the water of the river, and the sun that warmed the rice fields. His neighbors considered him eccentric until they noticed that year after year his harvests were better and more abundant than theirs. The teaching is simple. The mental attitude even toward the seemingly inanimate, establishes a relationship that is reflected in results. Here it is important to clear up a common confusion. Metaphysics does not deal with superstitions or practices that attribute power to external objects, nor is it a religion in itself. Metaphysics is a way of observing reality through the universal laws of mind and spirit. While it borrows elements from many traditions, its main focus is practical, how to apply those laws in daily life to live more fully. The mistake lies in believing that the invisible lacks rigor. The invisible is as real as the visible. It simply operates under laws we are not usually taught in school. And just as we learn arithmetic to manage money, we need to learn metaphysics to manage inner life. To begin understanding, it is helpful to establish 3 basic pillars that will accompany this entire manual. 1. Everything begins in the mind. Thought is cause, and the visible is effect. To change thought is to change the cause. 2. Life is correspondence. What is emitted in words, emotions, or beliefs returns multiplied. Just as the seed yields fruit, thought produces experience. 3. Practice is essential. Reading, listening, or studying is only the beginning. True learning occurs when these ideas are consciously applied in daily life. These pillars are simple, but they revolutionize the way we interpret existence, and here we will expand and deepen them. The reader may ask, what do I gain by studying metaphysics? The answer is as vast as life itself. One gains clarity to interpret events, strength to overcome trials, creativity to open new paths, and above all, inner peace. It is not about evading difficulties, but about understanding how to use them as steps for growth. On an Egyptian papyrus over 3,000 years old, one reads the following warning. The ignorant blame the gods for their misery. The wise look within and recognize their power. That is perhaps the best summary of what it means to begin this journey. To stop attributing what is external to divine whims, and to begin recognizing the creative role of our own mind. Chapter 2. The Mind as Architect, the Principle of Mentalism. If in the previous chapter we took the first steps toward understanding metaphysics, we must now delve into what can be considered its first great law, the principle of mentalism. This idea, present in both ancient and modern traditions, holds that all is mind. It does not refer solely to the human brain, but to the notion that the entire universe is, at its foundation, a mental field. Mentalism is found in texts as diverse as the Biblio attributed to Hermetic initiates, the Upanishads of India, and Neoplatonic doctrines. In all of them beats the same certainty. Before something manifests, it exists as thought, idea, or vibration. The material world is consequence, not cause. Let us imagine an architect before a blank sheet of paper. Before a single brick is placed, the building already exists in his mind. It has form, proportion, and function. What we later see as a solid structure was first an invisible design. The same occurs with everything that composes reality. Every circumstance, every encounter, every success or setback was preceded by a thought that opened the way. One might think this idea applies only to great creative processes, but it is enough to observe daily life to verify it. Consider the person who constantly repeats, "Nothing ever goes right for me." The curious thing is that this is not just an isolated complaint, but a decree that gradually organizes life to fulfill that statement. Mentalism teaches that persistent thought becomes a mold, and experience adapts to it as water to the vessel that contains it. There is a little-known story from the diaries of William James, considered one of the fathers of modern psychology. In one entry, he mentions a student who, convinced that he always forgot during exams, began to tremble even before reading the first question. James observed that it was not a lack of memory, but a mental pattern that triggered the block. When the student worked with opposite affirmations, "My mind remembers clearly, my memory is precise," the results changed radically. The external experience aligned with the new mental mold. If we accept that the mind is cause and reality is effect, then life becomes a mirror. This mirror does not always reflect what we want, but what we believe. And here lies the crucial difference. It is not enough to desire. What truly shapes experience is deep belief, what we accept as true, even unconsciously. A historical example can be found in the voyages of Christopher Columbus. It is said that, upon arriving at certain Caribbean islands, the natives could not see the approaching caravels. Not because they were blind, but because their minds contained no prior pattern of a wooden ship. They only recognized reality when a shaman, observing the movement of the water, intuited that something new was present. That is to say, until someone generated a mental concept, physical perception remained limited. The mind literally filters reality. Accepting this principle is not easy. It collides with the common idea that we are victims of external circumstances. If all is mind, it implies that we have more responsibility than we believe. It means recognizing that our words, thoughts, and emotions are not mere companions, but seeds that inevitably germinate. The beginner may feel resistance, since it is easier to blame chance, destiny, or even bad luck. But metaphysics insists every thought is a command, not always conscious, not always desired, but a command nonetheless. And the universe, like a faithful servant, fulfills what it is told. To begin applying mentalism, I propose a simple and powerful exercise. Keep a thought diary. For 3 consecutive days, write down the phrases most repeated in your mind. Do not worry about judging them. Just observe. Then classify them as positive, neutral, or negative affirmations. What you discover may surprise you. Most people realize they spend hours each day repeating decrees of scarcity, illness, or limitation. The very act of observing already generates a change. The mind, when watched, begins to correct itself. From there arises the possibility of introducing conscious affirmations to replace those that limit. Mentalism expresses itself in a particular way through words. What we say, especially when charged with emotion, is a decree that organizes energy. This is why sacred texts warn, "By your words you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." It is not about an external judgment, but about the natural law linking thought with manifestation. Think of something as ordinary as saying, "I'm starving to death." We may say it jokingly, but the unconscious mind does not distinguish jokes from decrees. It records the command and gradually organizes the body and life around that idea. It is not surprising that those who frequently use negative expressions have a reality that reflects them. A little-known anecdote from World War I illustrates the reach of this principle. It is said that, in a small French village, a group of women gathered to pray for their sons to return safely from the front. However, one of them, gripped by fear, kept repeating, "Most likely he'll be killed. We always have bad luck." Tragically, her son was the only one in the group who did not return. It was not that her words were a magical curse, but that they reflected a mental climate that attracted the corresponding experience. The moving part of the story is that, years later, this same woman became a defender of the idea that every word creates, teaching it to children and grandchildren so they would not repeat her mistake. When we understand mentalism, an inevitable question arises. Does everything depend solely on my individual mind? The answer is broader. Personal thoughts influence each person's life, but at the same time there exists a universal mind, a collective field that gathers the ideas, emotions, and beliefs of humanity. Just as every drop belongs to the ocean, every individual thought feeds the common field. This explains why certain beliefs seem so hard to eradicate. They are part of a collective pattern. For example, the idea that aging inevitably brings disease is so deeply rooted in the collective unconscious that it takes special effort from each individual to counteract it. But the good news is that when someone manages to transform themselves, they not only do so for themselves, but also help to elevate global consciousness. Everything we live is, in some way, the consequence of a prior thought. This does not mean we can control every external event, but it does mean we have power over how we interpret, respond to, and transform what happens. And that interpretation, in turn, opens paths to new experiences. Mentalism is not a dogma to be blindly believed. It is a principle to be tested in practice. The invitation, then, is to observe, experiment, and verify in your own life how thought directs reality. Chapter 3. The Subconscious, the Secret Workshop of Creation. The mind is not a uniform block. It has levels, layers, and distinct functions. Understanding this structure is crucial. Otherwise, we may strive to think positively and still find ourselves trapped in contrary experiences. The key lies in the subconscious, that secret workshop where ideas are molded and from which they are projected into reality. We can divide the human mind into three main areas. 1. Conscious, the logical, rational, analytical part. Here we make plans, solve immediate problems, and take daily decisions. 2. Subconscious, the deep archive where beliefs, memories, emotions, and behavioral patterns are stored. It functions automatically and does not argue or question. It simply obeys what has been recorded. 3. Superconscious or higher mind, the dimension of intuition, deep creativity, and connection with the divine. It is the source of inspiration that often manifests as sudden ideas or hunches. The subconscious is the link between what we think and what we experience. The conscious mind may have the best intention, but if the subconscious holds a contrary pattern, the latter prevails. It is often said that the subconscious is like a servant that never rests. It does not interpret whether the order it receives is convenient or not. It simply executes it. If someone constantly repeats, "I'm clumsy," the subconscious takes it as an instruction and organizes behavior to confirm that statement. That is why so many people end up trapped in cycles of self-sabotage without understanding the reason. The Scottish physician James S. Dyle, a pioneer in the use of hypnotism in the 19th century, discovered that he could perform surgical operations without chemical anesthesia if he succeeded in convincing the patient's subconscious that they would feel no pain. For him, this was a revelation. What the conscious accepts under suggestion, the subconscious converts into physical experience. Although his method was forgotten with the arrival of chloroform, his findings remain a testimony to the power of the subconscious. How a pattern is formed. From childhood we collect phrases, emotions, and experiences that are stored deep within. A single phrase repeated with emotional weight, "You'll never do anything right," "You don't deserve love," can remain recorded as a decree. As adults, those recordings continue to influence us, even if we no longer remember where they came from. An example can be found in the life of Russian composer Sergei Rachmaninoff. After premiering his first symphony in 1897, He received such devastating criticism that he fell into a deep depression and was unable to compose for 3 years. It was thanks to treatment with positive suggestion, what we would now call subconscious reprogramming, that he regained confidence and wrote his famous Piano Concerto number. 2. The initial criticism had planted a pattern of failure in his deep mind, and only by replacing it with new beliefs was he able to unlock his creative genius. The subconscious is not transformed with a single occasional thought. It needs repetition and emotion. An idea repeated without emotion is weak. An intense emotion, even brief, can be recorded quickly. That is why we vividly remember moments of fear or extreme joy. The subconscious prioritizes them. In practical terms, this means that if we want to sow a new pattern, we must repeat positive affirmations charged with feeling. It is not enough to say, "I am abundant," as if repeating an empty formula. We must feel abundance, imagine it, give it color and texture until the subconscious accepts it as real. The subconscious is also profoundly emotional. It does not understand irony or sarcasm. When someone describes themselves as a mess, even jokingly, the subconscious archives it without question. It is like a mirror that reflects everything placed before it without critical capacity. A curious story illustrates this. In the 17th century, mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal wrote a note on paper, affirming with conviction that his faith was firm and that he dedicated his life to God. He then sewed the note into the lining of his jacket and never parted with it. Pascal knew that by reading and rereading those words, even unconsciously, he was reinforcing in his subconscious the belief that sustained him. That seemingly simple gesture was enough to keep him inspired amid his existential crises. How to dialogue with the subconscious? The first step is to recognize that the subconscious is always active. The second is to learn to direct it consciously. Here are some methods. 1. Affirmations. Positive, clear, present tense phrases repeated with conviction. 2. Visualization. Imagining a desired scene with rich details and associated emotions. 3. Nighttime autosuggestion. Before sleep, the subconscious is more receptive. Repeating a positive thought at that moment has greater impact. 4. Immediate replacement. When a negative thought arises, deny it and replace it with its positive opposite. These methods are simple but require consistency. It is not about forcing the mind, but about training it, as one would strengthen a muscle through daily practice. The greatest enemy of mental reprogramming is doubt. When someone affirms, "I am healthy," but inwardly thinks, "This is ridiculous, I know I'm sick," doubt neutralizes the command. The subconscious perceives the contradiction and continues operating with the old pattern. That is why it is important to begin with affirmations that feel believable for each person. Instead of saying, "I'm a millionaire," it may be more effective to affirm, "Each day more opportunities for prosperity open in my life." It is a bridge the mind accepts more easily, and through repetition, opens the path to more expansive beliefs. Dreams are a privileged window into the subconscious. They often show in symbolic form the beliefs and emotions we have repressed. The ancient Greeks knew this well. In the temples of Asclepius, god of healing, they practiced dream incubation. The sick would sleep in the temple, hoping to receive, through dreams, messages for their healing. What they sought was not magic, but access to the deep wisdom of the subconscious. Practically, writing down dreams and reflecting on them can reveal hidden patterns shaping life. Even more, before sleep, posing a clear question to the subconscious can lead the answer to appear in the form of a dream or intuition upon waking. We can imagine the subconscious as a secret workshop in which experiences are manufactured. The conscious mind is like the master who delivers blueprints, the subconscious, the worker who executes them to the letter. If the blueprints are filled with fear, guilt, or resentment, the workshop will produce scenarios of suffering. If the blueprints are of trust, love, and hope, the production will be very different. The great challenge is to recognize that we are the architects of those blueprints. No one can introduce a belief into our subconscious without our acceptance, even if it is unconscious. By becoming aware of this, we regain the power to redesign our life from the inside out. Chapter 4. The Power of the Word. Decrees that shape reality. Language is not just a means of communication, it is a creative tool. Every spoken word is a decree that, whether consciously or not, directs the energy of our life. Modern science confirms what the sages intuited. Every word is vibration. Sound propagates in waves that affect matter. In 1967, physician Hans Jenny conducted cymatics experiments, the study of how sound organizes matter, and discovered that certain frequencies produced perfect geometric shapes in particles of dust and liquids. What was striking is that harmonic sounds generated beautiful, ordered figures, while chaotic noises produced disordered shapes. The conclusion is clear. Words are not lost in the air. They have an organizing or disorganizing effect. When we speak them, we are sending vibrations that shape our own energy field and that of those around us. Not all words have the same impact. A word spoken without enthusiasm dissolves quickly, but when charged with emotion, it gains multiplied strength. Consider the difference between saying "I love you" absent-mindedly and saying it with deep conviction. The effect is not the same, neither for the listener nor for the speaker. In metaphysical terms, the spoken word acts as a seal that confirms the mental command. Thought designs, the word launches it into the universe, and emotion gives it the energy necessary to materialize. The interesting thing is that we are constantly decreeing, even if we are unaware of it. Every time someone says, "I never have luck," "I always get sick in winter," "I'm terrible at math," they are sealing an instruction that the subconscious receives as a mandate. The same occurs with seemingly harmless phrases such as "I'm hungry" or "This is killing me with laughter." The unconscious does not distinguish between metaphor and literalness. It obeys. A curious anecdote is found in the diaries of Thomas Edison. On one occasion, he wrote that he had failed more than 1,000 times in trying to find the right filament for the electric light bulb. But he never used the word failure. He said, "I have discovered 1,000 ways that don't work." His decree was not one of defeat, but of progress. That way of speaking not only sustained him emotionally, but also directed his mind and that of his collaborators toward persistence. The ancients understood that a name had power. In many cultures, names were carefully chosen because they were believed to influence destiny. The Egyptians, for example, spoke of the Ren, the secret name of each person, which had to be protected because it contained their essence. Similarly, in Hebrew tradition, changing a name signified the beginning of a new destiny. Abram became Abraham, Jacob became Israel. Today, although we may not give it the same importance, we still experience the weight of verbal labels. A child repeatedly called restless, absent-minded, or clumsy tends to develop traits consistent with those decrees. The word becomes prophecy. We can classify words into two major groups: constructive words, elevate; nurture, strengthen. Examples: peace, health, abundance, confidence, harmony. Destructive words: divide, weaken, sow fear. Examples: failure, hate, misery, impossible, never. The quality of our life is directly related to the type of words we most often use. Taking a verbal inventory, as we suggested earlier with thoughts, is a revealing practice. Many discover that their vocabulary is saturated with negative decrees, which unknowingly have been programming their reality. Practical exercise: watching your language. For 1 week, try the following exercise. 1. Choose a small notebook. 2. Each time you say a negative phrase, write it down. 3. Immediately reformulate it in positive form. For example, if you say, "I feel exhausted," you can correct it with, "I need to recharge energy, and I am doing so." This simple habit trains the subconscious to receive new instructions. The important thing is not to fake artificial cheerfulness, but to direct language toward construction rather than destruction. Paradoxically, the power of the word is best understood when we learn to value silence. Not every word must be spoken. Conscious silence is an ally that prevents impulsive decrees. The Pythagorean philosopher Philolaus taught his disciples to keep 5 years of silence before speaking in public. The aim was for them to understand the weight of every word and not waste it on trivialities. Today we do not need such rigor, but we can remember that every word spoken has consequence. Speaking less with more intention multiplies the power of what we say. In various traditions appears the idea that the world was created through the word. In Genesis we read, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." In Hindu cosmology, the primordial sound Om is the origin of the universe. For the Maya, the deity Hurakan thought and spoke the world into existence. Beyond the symbolic form, the message is the same. The word is creative power. When we learn to decree consciously, we participate in that same power in our own lives. A little-known story from classical Greece tells that the orator Demosthenes, as a child, was shy and stammering. His teacher scolded him, saying he would never speak in public. Instead of accepting that decree, Demosthenes created his own decrees. He practiced speeches with stones in his mouth to strengthen his diction and told himself, "My voice will be heard." Decades later, he became one of the greatest orators of Athens. His story shows how to counteract the words of others with one's own decrees. A metaphysical decree must meet certain conditions. Positive, focused on what is wanted, not on what is feared. Present, formulated as if it were already happening. Concrete, without ambiguities. "I have inner peace" is clearer than "I want to feel better." Grateful, sealed with gratitude, which is the confirmation of faith. Example: "I declare that harmony reigns in my body and in my life. Thank you, for so it is." Repetition and emotion are the fuel. Each decree must be felt as truth, even if at first it seems strange. Over time, the subconscious will accept it and manifest it. Chapter 5. Faith as a shaping force of reality. If thoughts are the seeds, the subconscious the soil, and the word the water that activates life, then faith is the sun that gives warmth and growth. Faith is not a mere religious feeling, nor is it blind belief. It is a creative force, the conviction that what we do not yet see with our eyes already exists in the invisible plane and is on its way to manifestation. What is faith in metaphysical terms? The biblical definition says, "Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen." Translated into metaphysical language, this means that faith is the ability to hold an idea as true even when appearances suggest otherwise. It is keeping focus on the invisible cause and not on the visible effect. By contrast, fear is also a form of faith. Faith in the negative. Whoever fears is convinced that something bad will happen. And since the mind obeys conviction, it ends up producing that result. Thus, we can say that faith and fear are the same force, only applied in opposite directions. Imagine a magnet placed under a sheet of paper. Iron filings are scattered on the sheet. Although we cannot see the magnet, the filings align according to its magnetic field. Faith acts in the same way. It organizes circumstances so that they conform to inner conviction. History is full of examples of people who, against all odds, held unwavering faith and saw impossible paths open before them. A lesser-known case is that of Mary Anning, a humble English girl of the 19th century, the daughter of a poor carpenter. From a young age, she was convinced she would find great fossils near her village, even though the geologists of the time ridiculed her. With perseverance and absolute faith in her intuition, she discovered some of the world's most important prehistoric remains, including the first complete ichthyosaur. Her conviction shaped reality, and today she is recognized as a pioneer of paleontology, even though in her time no one believed in her. It is important to understand that faith is not passivity. Having faith does not mean sitting and waiting for miracles without lifting a finger. It means acting with confidence, knowing that every step, however small, is supported by a greater force. When the Wright brothers were attempting flight in 1903, most experts insisted it was impossible for a machine heavier than air to rise. Yet they held faith in their vision. That faith drove them to experiment, correct mistakes, rise after each fall, and persevere until they succeeded. Faith manifested in action, and action confirmed faith. Faith as a faculty to be exercised. Faith is not a gift reserved for a few enlightened ones. It is a faculty we all have and can be trained like a muscle. Some practical ways to exercise it are: 1. Recall past victories. Write a list of moments when something seemed impossible yet happened. Reviewing them strengthens confidence that the invisible becomes visible. 2. Start with small goals. Exercise faith in everyday situations, such as quickly finding a solution to a minor problem. Each success reinforces belief in the law. 3. Visualization with emotion. Imagine the desired outcome as if it were already real, feeling the joy of having achieved it. 4. Declaration of anticipatory gratitude. Give thanks in advance, as if what is expected had already been received. Gratitude is pure faith expressed. We all experience moments of doubt. The key is to recognize that doubt is natural, but not to let it rule. When it appears, we can repeat affirmations that restore confidence. What I seek already exists in the invisible plane. I trust the perfect order of the universe. Life always aligns for my highest good. A moving example comes from explorer Ernest Shackleton. During his Antarctic expedition in 1914, his ship was trapped in ice, and the crew spent nearly 2 years in extreme conditions. What is remarkable is that Shackleton never allowed despair to dominate. He nourished his men's faith with firm words, "We will get home." That shared faith sustained morale until they were finally rescued. Not a single member of the crew died, something extraordinary given the circumstances. Faith acts not only individually, but also collectively. When a group of people share firm convictions, energy multiplies. Great social, scientific, and spiritual revolutions have been born from collectives that upheld a vision beyond the evidence. An illustrative case was the struggle of Hungarian doctors Ignaz Semmelweis and Joseph Skoda in the 19th century. Both insisted, against prevailing opinion, that washing hands with disinfectant could save thousands of women from puerperal fever. The medical community ridiculed them for years, but their faith in the truth of their discovery kept them firm. Today, that basic principle of hygiene is universal. Faith is measured in difficult times. When everything seems easy, believing costs nothing. It is in the midst of the storm that true inner strength is revealed. Metaphysically, trials are not punishments but opportunities to exercise faith. We can view faith as a compass in the middle of the fog. Even when the path cannot be seen, it is enough to trust the direction it points to move forward. The compass does not clear the fog, but it assures us we will reach the destination. Practice exercise. The list of impossibles. Make a list of 5 things you now consider nearly impossible in your life. A financial goal, a harmonious relationship, a healing, a creative project. Then, next to each one, write, "This already exists in the invisible and is on its way to manifesting perfectly." Read the list each night before sleeping and each morning upon waking. You do not need to know how it will happen. The how belongs to the universe. Your task is to sustain faith. Chapter 6. Love as the supreme law of the universe. We have spoken about the mind, the subconscious, the word, and faith. All of these are essential pillars, but none stand fully without the greater foundation, love. In metaphysics, love is not merely a romantic or affective feeling. It is the primordial energy that sustains, organizes, and harmonizes the universe. It is the highest vibration and the integrating principle of all spiritual laws. In daily life, we often confuse love with attachment, desire, or sympathy. From a metaphysical perspective, love is something much vaster. It is the force that unites diversity in harmony. It is the energy that allows galaxies to remain in balance, cells to cooperate within an organism, and human beings to find meaning in compassion. The philosopher Simone Weil said, "Love is the gravity of the soul." Just as gravity keeps bodies in orbit, love keeps the parts of the universe bound together in a coherent whole. Love is the force that turns faith into results. You may have positive thoughts, powerful words, and precise decrees, but if they are not imbued with love, they lack the energy needed to endure. An example can be found in the life of Nikola Tesla. Though a man of science, Tesla affirmed that many of his ideas came from a deep feeling of connection and reverence for nature. He said that whoever wants to understand the universe must think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration, but he also insisted that the driving force of all progress must be love for humanity. His creativity was not mere calculation, but an impulse of love towards something greater than himself. Modern studies confirm what ancient traditions taught. Love has a healing power. Researcher David McClelland at Harvard University discovered that people who watched scenes of compassion and love showed an immediate increase in their levels of immunoglobulin A, a key antibody for the body's defense. This confirms that love is not just a subjective emotional state, but a real energy that strengthens both body and mind. When a person holds resentment or hatred, the body reflects it in tension, inflammation, and illness. When one cultivates love and compassion, the path opens toward health and regeneration. There is a great difference between conditional love, which depends on what we receive, on others' behavior, on external circumstances, and unconditional love, which simply radiates without asking anything in return. The first fluctuates, the second endures. A moving example is found in the life of Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps. Frankl recounted that what sustained him in the midst of horror was the memory of his wife's face. Amid hunger and violence, he discovered he could experience love even without having her physically near. That unconditional love gave him meaning and strength and became the foundation of his famous logotherapy. Why is unconditional love so difficult for us? Because the ego seeks conditions. I love you if you give to me. I appreciate you if you think like me. I accept you if you do not fail me. But true love does not depend on others' behavior. It is an inner decision to recognize the divine spark in every being. Resentment, envy, and fear are the most common barriers. Every time we feed these emotions, we close the door to the natural flow of love. The metaphysical challenge is to learn to dissolve these shadows through understanding and forgiveness. To speak of love in metaphysics is inevitably to speak of forgiveness. It does not mean justifying the unjustifiable, but freeing oneself from the poison of hatred. Forgiveness is, at its core, an act of love toward oneself, for it breaks the chains of the past and opens space for healing. A little-known case is that of Louis Zamperini, an American Olympic runner who was a prisoner of war in Japan during World War II. He was brutally tortured by one of his captors. Years later, as a public speaker, he recounted that what truly liberated him was not surviving, but forgiving his tormentors. That act of love saved him from decades of resentment and restored his inner peace. Practical exercise, radiating love. A simple method to cultivate metaphysical love is as follows. 1. Sit in silence and bring attention to your heart. 2. Imagine a warm, expansive light shining from it. 3. First, send it to yourself with words such as, I love and accept myself as I am. 4. Then extend it to someone close, next to someone with whom you have difficulties, and finally to the entire world. Practice daily. This exercise strengthens the vibration of love in the subconscious and begins to reflect in external relationships and experiences. There is also a direct connection between love and abundance. Where there is love, energy flows. Where there is greed, fear, or resentment, energy stagnates. Prosperity is not only a matter of mental techniques, but of allowing love to open the channels of giving and receiving. The Indian entrepreneur Jamsetji Tata, founder of the Tata Group, attributed his success not to the pursuit of wealth itself, but to his desire to improve the lives of millions. That loving orientation made his work transcend generations and become an empire built on social trust. Chapter 7. The Law of Correspondence. As above, so below. Among metaphysical laws, few are as fascinating as the law of correspondence. Its classic formulation, from the Hermetic tradition, states, as above, so below, as within, so without. This phrase holds a key to understanding how everything that exists reflects itself across different planes of reality, and how what happens within us inevitably manifests outwardly. The law of correspondence begins with a simple idea. The universe is a hologram where each part reflects the whole. What occurs on one level, microcosm, has its correspondence on another level, macrocosm. This is why the ancients studied the movement of the stars to understand human behavior or analyze the human body as a reflection of the cosmos. The astronomer Johannes Kepler, for example, saw in planetary orbits a correspondence with music, which he called the harmony of the spheres. For him, the laws of the heavens and those of music were distinct expressions of the same principle. Practical applications of correspondence. What happens within you, thoughts, emotions, beliefs, is reflected outside you, circumstances, relationships, opportunities. What is experienced in the small reflects the great, and the great can be understood through the small. A heart full of resentment will hardly find peace in its surroundings. A mind trained in gratitude will tend to attract situations that reinforce that state. The external world is a mirror, not a source. A curious case is found in the life of Paracelsus, the 16th century physician and alchemist. He claimed that every plant in nature bore the shape of the illness it could heal. He observed, for instance, that walnuts resembling the human brain benefited the nervous system, and that herbs with heart-shaped leaves aided cardiac problems. Today, this is known as the doctrine of signatures, but his vision was a practical application of correspondence. What nature displayed in outward form was a reflection of its inner function. A more contemporary example is found in the architecture of Antoni Gaudí. Inspired by nature, Gaudí designed columns shaped like trees, ceilings resembling seashells, and structures imitating honeycombs. His intention was not merely aesthetic, but the recognition that the laws governing nature below correspond to those that sustain great human creations above. Correspondence is also evident in the human body. Every physical symptom often reflects a deeper emotion or thought. Back pain may relate to emotional burdens, throat problems to difficulties in self-expression, skin disorders to conflicts of identity and protection. Psychologist Carl Gustav Jung spoke of synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that are not random, but correspondences between the inner and the outer. A person who constantly represses their inner voice may coincidentally encounter situations where others silence or ignore them until they grasp the message and transform their interior state. How to apply the law of correspondence. 1. Self-observation. Instead of complaining about an external situation, ask, what does this reflect about my inner state? 2. Change within to change without. If the outer world is a mirror, trying to alter it without inner change is futile. The work must begin in mind and heart. 3. Look for repetitive patterns, recurrent themes in life, conflictive relationships, scarcity, illness. Signal an internal pattern not yet resolved. 4. Apply analogy in learning. Study the small to understand the great, and the great to inspire the small. For instance, observing cycles in nature can help us understand emotional cycles. Practical exercise, the daily mirror. Each night, write down 3 significant events from your day. Then ask yourself, what does this reflect about my inner state? What belief or emotion sustains this outcome? What can I change within myself so that tomorrow reflects something different? With time, this exercise clearly shows how what happens outside is an X-ray of the inside. Those who do not understand this law feel like victims of life, as if circumstances were products of chance. Those who do understand it assume responsibility and power. But one must be careful not to fall into guilt. Recognizing that the outer reflects the inner does not mean punishing oneself for results, but seeing them as valuable information for growth. Correspondence is not punishment, it is a teacher. Every situation is a message. What you see outside was born within you. If you do not like it, change within, and the outside will follow. Ultimately, the law of correspondence reminds us that we live in a coherent universe. Nothing is disconnected. The atom reflects the galaxy, the individual reflects humanity, the microcosm reflects the macrocosm. What we do in the small impacts the great, and the great inspires the small. It is as if the entire universe were a grand musical score, where every note corresponds to another, and all are part of a greater symphony. Chapter 8. The Law of Cause and Effect. Nothing happens by chance. Everything that happens has a cause, even if it is invisible at first glance. This principle is as rigorous in the spiritual realm as it is in the physical one. Just as an apple seed cannot produce pears, a cause rooted in resentment cannot yield peace. Physics teaches us that every action produces a reaction. Metaphysics extends this idea into the field of consciousness. Every thought, word, or action generates an effect that inevitably returns to its source, not as punishment, but as a natural consequence. The Eastern sage Lao Tzu expressed it this way: "Follow the law of cause and effect, and you will need neither judges nor executioners." Life itself takes care of balancing the forces. We often say, "What a coincidence I met this person," or "I had bad luck." But from a metaphysical view, what we call coincidence is simply causality we do not yet understand. A chain of invisible causes has aligned to produce that outcome. The story of Alexander Fleming, discoverer of penicillin, illustrates this truth. At first glance, his discovery seems accidental. He forgot to cover a bacterial culture dish, and a mold contaminated the experiment. Yet when we look closer, chance was supported by prior causes: his obsession with hygiene, his discipline in recording every detail, and his open-mindedness to notice what others would have discarded. What looked like accident was the effect of a subtle chain of causes. Accepting this law makes us free, because it reminds us that we are not toys of destiny. At the same time, it makes us responsible, because what we live today is the fruit of causes sown yesterday. A student who complains about failing an exam cannot blame bad luck. It is the natural effect of not having studied enough. In the same way, someone who lives surrounded by conflict may need to reflect on whether they have previously planted seeds of intolerance or criticism. The good news is that if we have planted causes we do not like, we can begin right now to plant new ones and harvest different effects in the future. What we see in the present is the fruit of older causes, often planted unconsciously. This explains why certain problems seem to fall from the sky. In truth, they are the ripening of seeds we no longer remember sowing. In India, this principle is explained through the concept of karma, which means action. Karma is not punishment, but simply the accumulation of causes generating their corresponding effects. Every action, thought, or emotion leaves an imprint that sooner or later returns. How to apply the law of cause and effect. 1. Observe current fruits. Every difficult situation can be viewed as an effect. Ask, what cause originated this? 2. Assume responsibility without guilt. It is not about self-punishment, but about recognizing the link and deciding on new causes. 3. Conscious sowing. Introduce thoughts, words, and actions that align with what you want to harvest. 4. Practice delayed sowing. Understand that effects are not always immediate. Just as a tree takes time to bear fruit, our causes need time to manifest. Practical exercise, conscious sowing. For 1 week, each morning choose a cause you want to plant: patience, gratitude, joy, generosity. Make a deliberate effort to practice it in your actions and words. At the end of the day, note the effects you observe. Changes in your mood, reactions from others, unexpected coincidences. Over time, you will see that systematically cultivating a cause produces visible and lasting effects. One of the great traps when understanding this law is to see it as condemnation. If I suffer, it must be because I did something wrong. Not so. The law does not punish, it teaches. If you put your hand in fire and it burns, the pain is not revenge from the fire, but information so you learn how to use it wisely. In the same way, every unpleasant effect is a signal inviting you to plant new causes. From this perspective, even painful experiences are teachers guiding us toward a more conscious life. The law of cause and effect is not a chain of fatality. On the contrary, it is what guarantees our freedom. If everything were random, we would be at the mercy of luck. But if everything responds to causes, then we have the ability to choose new causes and therefore new effects. This means that each day is an opportunity to begin again, to redesign the future. The power does not lie in changing the past, but in sowing today what we want to harvest tomorrow. Chapter 9. The Law of Rhythm, the Cycles that Govern Existence. In the universe, everything moves, everything vibrates, and everything follows a cadence. No process is linear but rhythmic. This truth, formulated in the Hermetic tradition as the law of rhythm, teaches that everything flows in cycles of rise and fall, expansion and contraction, light and shadow. Understanding this principle allows us to stop fighting against life's cycles and instead learn to navigate them in harmony. The most evident example is found in nature. Day follows night. The seasons succeed one another in immutable order. The tide rises and falls with precision. The heart contracts and expands in constant pulses. Nothing remains static. The pendulum movement is present in everything, from atoms to galaxies. The Persian poet Omar Khayyam put it simply, "The sunrise does not shine forever, nor does the full moon remain in the sky. Everything rises, everything declines." Human life and cycles. Our lives are also subject to rhythm. Moods fluctuate between enthusiasm and melancholy. Times of prosperity are followed by times of scarcity. Periods of intense activity are followed by phases of rest. The trap is believing that the good will last forever or that the difficult will never end. Wisdom lies in understanding that everything passes. Neither pain nor joy is permanent. Both move in a cadence that invites us to learn and grow. A seldom cited example is that of Ibn Khaldun, a 14th century Arab historian. In his Muqaddimah, he described how civilizations go through cycles of birth, flourishing, and decline as naturally as living beings. His theory anticipated what we now understand as social and historical rhythms. No culture remains at the summit forever. Everything moves in waves. Another case is seen in the music of Johann Sebastian Bach. His compositions are filled with counterpoints and rhythmic oscillations that reflect in art the same universal law. Balance is not achieved through permanence but through constant movement. Metaphysically, rhythm manifests in our emotions as a pendulum. When we swing to one extreme, joy, euphoria, inevitably the pendulum will return to the opposite side, sadness, calm. This should not discourage us. It means that highs and lows are not signs of failure, but natural parts of the process. The key lies in not identifying with the extremes, but learning to remain in the point of inner balance, a practice the Hermetists called neutralizing the pendulum. How to neutralize the pendulum? 1. Observe without attachment. When a strong emotion arises, recognize it, feel it, but do not allow it to dictate major decisions. 2. Remember the law. In a moment of difficulty, remind yourself, this too shall pass. In a moment of euphoria, remember the same. This too shall pass. 3. Cultivate the center. Through meditation, prayer, or contemplation, anchor yourself in an inner point that remains still even while the pendulum swings. An illustrative example comes from the Trappist monks, who alternate prayer and manual labor in strict rhythms. Their discipline does not aim to repress emotions, but to train the soul to recognize that everything has its time and measure. Great creators know that inspiration also follows rhythms. There are fertile times when ideas flow abundantly and barren times when nothing seems to come forth. Expecting constant productivity is to ignore the law of rhythm. Vincent van Gogh, for instance, went through long periods of silence before his intense bursts of painting. Each phase was necessary. The silence incubated what later exploded into color. Recognizing rhythm allows us to embrace both pause and action. Practical exercise. The Pendulum Journal. For 1 month, keep a daily record of your mood and energy. Mark days of enthusiasm, calm, fatigue. At the end of the month, look for patterns. You will discover that your emotions follow a more predictable rhythm than you thought. This awareness will help you organize your life in harmony with your cycles, instead of fighting against them. When we accept the law of rhythm, we cultivate patience. We know that the hard times will pass and that the good will return in new forms. We learn to sow today even if we do not yet see fruit, trusting that every cycle has its moment. Life is like a river, sometimes serene, sometimes turbulent, but always moving. Resisting the flow produces suffering. Flowing with it brings wisdom. Chapter 10. The Law of Transmutation, the Art of Transforming Energy. After exploring the principles of metaphysics, thought, the subconscious, the word, faith, love, correspondence, cause and effect, and rhythm, we arrive at the law that synthesizes and elevates them all. Transmutation. This teaching, inherited from Hermeticism and alchemy, affirms that all energy can be transformed into another form, and that human beings have the power to consciously direct that transformation. Physics confirms it. Energy is never destroyed, only transformed. What we call death in nature is simply a change of form. A leaf that falls to the ground does not disappear. It becomes nourishment for the soil. Water that evaporates is not lost. It becomes cloud and then rain. Metaphysically, the same occurs with our emotions, thoughts, and experiences. Hatred can be transmuted into understanding, sadness into wisdom, difficulty into opportunity. The key is to become aware of the energy present and decide to redirect it. The medieval alchemists sought to turn lead into gold. While many interpreted this literally, in reality it symbolized the inner work, transforming the heaviness of instincts into the purity of enlightened consciousness. One of them, Basil Valentine, wrote that the true philosopher's stone was divine love, the power that transforms all impurities into light. Alchemy, then, was not about manipulating metals, but about transmuting the soul. A little-known story is that of Miyamoto Musashi, the legendary Japanese samurai of the 17th century. After decades of battles and duels, Musashi realized that violence was not the final path. He retired and wrote the Book of 5 Rings, where he transformed the energy of war into strategic wisdom applicable to life and leadership. This transmutation made him a master beyond the sword. Another example is the Chilean poet Vicente Huidobro. During World War I, he was wounded on the front lines. Instead of sinking into despair, he transformed his pain into creative drive, developing his creacionismo aesthetic, which proclaimed that the poet should not merely describe reality, but create it. Emotions are energies in motion. When we repress them, they stagnate. When we recognize them, we can transmute them. Fear, courage. Fear signals a challenge. Courage arises when we face it. Anger, constructive action. The energy of anger can be redirected toward just defense or social transformation. Sadness, empathy, lived pain makes us more sensitive to the suffering of others. The secret lies in not identifying with emotion as something fixed, but seeing it as plastic energy that we can shape. Techniques of transmutation. 1. Conscious breathing. While inhaling, imagine drawing in light. While exhaling, visualize dense emotion transforming into clarity. 2. Mental reframing. Ask yourself, what lesson or hidden gift does this experience bring? 3. Symbolic action. Transform pain into art, writing, music, painting, or any creative expression. 4. Mantralization. Repeat an elevated word or sound, such as peace, light, or om, to reorient inner vibration. Understanding this law reminds us that we are not condemned to remain in states of darkness. If everything can be transformed, then there is always a way out. Failure can become learning, grief can become compassion, an obstacle can become a doorway. Viktor Frankl expressed it luminously. Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances. That choice is transmutation in action. Transmutation reaches its highest expression when it not only transforms personal life, but also serves others. Whoever converts their suffering into wisdom becomes a beacon for others. Whoever transmutes anger into justice opens paths of reconciliation. Whoever transmutes fear into courage inspires entire communities. A moving example is Malala Yousafzai. After surviving an assassination attempt, instead of surrendering to hatred, she transmuted that experience into a loving force that made her a global defender of the right to education. Practical exercise. The inner laboratory. Each time you experience a dense emotion, write on a sheet, what I feel. Example, frustration. What energy lies beneath it? Example, desire for things to turn out better. What I can transform it into? Example, discipline and perseverance. This simple laboratory turns every experience into raw material for growth. With transmutation, we understand that there are no useless experiences or bad emotions. Everything is working material. Everything can become spiritual gold. This law is the synthesis of all the others, reminding us that life is not about avoiding the negative, but about transforming it into opportunity. The law of transmutation invites us to become alchemists of life. Nothing is lost. Everything can be transformed. By learning to direct energy, we discover that obstacles are raw material for greatness, and that within every human being lies the philosopher's stone capable of turning any shadow into light.